A few years ago, I had to go to an airport for a business trip. Since my flight was scheduled for the early hours, when I arrived at the airport, the sun had not yet risen. The weather was dark and cold, and the airport was quiet and calm. After completing the check-in process, I proceeded to the waiting lounge. I sat down in my seat and waited for the other passengers, and the silence of the airport started to become quite boring. However, after a while, a strange incident occurred. An elderly man sitting across from me suddenly stood up and caught the attention of all the passengers. His eyes were vacant, and he began to speak. However, the language he was speaking was unintelligible. It was as if he was experiencing something in his own inner world, and his connection with the outside world had been severed. Other passengers and airport staff tried to calm the man down, but his behavior began to take on an increasingly bizarre form. He began waving his arms, looking around, and walking rapidly. People gathered around him, and his movements were eerie. An announcement was made, and security personnel were called. However, the man quickly moved toward a corner of the lounge and suddenly stopped moving, collapsing to the ground. First aid teams arrived promptly, but his eyes still remained vacant. Despite their efforts, they couldn't bring him back. After the incident, the airport fell into silence. Passengers were looking around in disbelief. It's difficult to describe the complex emotions I felt at that moment. Both the unsettling nature of the event and the man's condition had a profound impact on people. As the departure time for my flight approached, the airport came back to life. However, this frightening incident still lingers vividly in my mind. The silence of the airport and this strange event serve as a reminder of how complex and unknown things can lurk behind the routine of everyday life. A few years ago, my friends and I were eagerly researching famous paranormal phenomena. One cold winter night, we gathered together, and the conversation quickly turned to the mysterious details surrounding John F. Kennedy's assassination. While the idea of summoning his spirit initially seemed absurd, our curiosity and bravery led us into this peculiar experience. As a researcher, I was curious about such experiments, but I was also apprehensive. My friends who joined the meeting were in a similar emotional mix. We assembled in a private room surrounded by old books and equipment. We turned off the lights in the room, lit candles, and as the silence enveloped us, tension mounted. We began the ritual to summon Kennedy's spirit, which involved using words and symbols from ancient texts. At one point, a strange coldness pervaded the room, as if someone was inside us, not beside us. An energy seemed to permeate the entire room, as if there was electricity in the air. Suddenly, we heard a disturbing cracking sound. We all froze in place. A section of the wall cracked in a thin line, and then the cracking intensified. We were in a state of fear, unsure of what to do. At that moment, I felt a distinct rush of cold air in the room. My body felt almost frozen, and suddenly, in one corner of the room, I saw a distinct silhouette. That silhouette resembled the familiar face of John F. Kennedy, but his face was expressionless, his eyes empty. My friends confirmed that they saw the same thing. It was as if that silhouette was the spirit of Kennedy, but somehow incomplete, as if something was missing. Panic filled the room, and everyone wanted to leave. However, the exit door was somehow locked. We struggled with the door, managed to open it, and ran out. One of our friends, still affected by the experience, decided not to return home until finding a new place to live. He stayed at another friend's house. That moment felt like a mix of reality and a terrifying dream. We couldn't tell if we had encountered Kennedy's spirit or if our own fears and desires were playing tricks on us. That night, filled with tension and curiosity, we dispersed to our homes. This experience remains one of the most complex and suspenseful memories of my life. A few years ago, I moved into a new house and was excited to get to know my neighbors. However, my encounter with Leo, a young man living in the adjacent apartment, led to one of the most complex and unsettling experiences of my life. At first, Leo seemed quite calm and normal. However, over time, his odd behavior and bizarre ideas became noticeable. Among the neighbors, there were discussions about him having a mental illness, but no one really knew what was going on. One day, I ran into Leo in the elevator. His eyes were vacant, as if he were in another world. I tried to talk to him, but his responses were nonsensical. At one point, he said to me, "Reality is an illusion, and our souls are imprisoned." These words sent shivers down my spine, because their meaning was vague and eerie. As the days passed, Leo's behavior became even stranger. Mysterious sounds emanating from his apartment late at night, strange rituals, and peculiar-looking visitors became more and more frequent. People around me shared frightening stories they had heard about him. Leo's mental illness had created fear and unease among the neighbors. One night, while I was alone in my house, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, Leo was standing there, his eyes glaring madly. He said, "You are trapped in my dreams. Set me free." His voice was trembling, and his facial expression was manic. In that moment, I recoiled in fear and hastily closed the door. From that moment on, I lived in fear. I felt like Leo was following me, constantly noticing his shadow near my home. I decided to gather more information about him. Through my research, I discovered that Leo had actually escaped from a mental institution some time ago and was in need of medical help. Accepting that Leo had a mental illness and seeking help was a difficult decision. However, I realized that I needed to take this step for the safety of our neighbors and my own psychological well-being. I reported the situation to the appropriate authorities, and Leo was apprehended. He received the help he needed and was placed in treatment. This experience was truly frightening and unsettling. Leo's mental illness had not only affected his life, but also the lives of everyone around him. This story demonstrated how crucial mental health is, and how sometimes we may have to confront fear-inducing realities.